If things don't have nature, then God is a thing in the universe, and God doesn't have a nature either. How do we explain how God acts? And the idea, nominalism led to voluntarism, the idea that God's actions don't come out of his nature, but they proceed from his will. God's will is supreme. So to this day, you'll hear preachers in some traditions say, well, God can do whatever God wants, that's medieval voluntarism, placing God's will above God's nature, because they'd say God has no nature apart from what is prescribed by his will. So we see in the modern age the beginning of an emphasis on the will. The will as being especially important. So for the people of this movement, God does not have a nature, but is a being of sheer power, and God's actions flow only from God's will. So we see that God is now unpredictable. He's powerful, he's unpredictable. Michael Gillespie wrote in The Theological Origins of Modernity, the new vision of God that rose to prominence in the 14th century emphasized divine power and unpredictability rather than divine love and reason. Joseph Albanese and Carol Chirpin, since God could do whatever he willed, and this will was unfathomable to the human mind, God's will, and thus the world, became absolutely contingent. Since God's will was absolutely alien and contingent, and thus God's reasons for creating the world and the way the world functioned in itself, reality too was perceived as contingent and alienated from the human mind and its existential concerns. Catherine Pickstock, the British Anglican liturgist, God was no longer seen as manifest in and through the world, albeit in a mysterious way. God came to be seen as a distant, unknown reality who related to the world through the imposition of his will. You see this quite poignantly, I think, in some of the difficulties that Martin Luther experienced when he was trying to reform the church. Luther, like many of the theologians of the time, subscribed to the new nominalist view of things, and he was troubled because he couldn't be sure that he was forgiven. He couldn't be sure that he was saved. He kept going to the sacrament of penance again and again. How do I know that I made a good confession? How do I know that I really am forgiven? Hans Blumenberg wrote, since God could do whatever he willed, and this will was unfathomable to the human mind, God's will, and thus the world, became absolutely contingent. The situation out of which modernity originated is marked by a fundamental uncertainty about reality and an intense consciousness of insecurity. And this is really one of the focal points of this 4-class course here, is the uncertainty about reality and intense consciousness of insecurity, what that did to us as a people, as a civilization. What did we do to try to regain a sense of belonging in the world, to regain a sense that reality was safe, to regain some sense of security? What did that insecurity, what did that uncertainty about reality and our place in it lead to? And that's what I'm going to look at next week. A little touch. I'd say security was sought by limiting knowledge to the scientific, to what can be proven as a fact. everything else is rendered mere opinion. And through technology, we extend our control and manipulation of the natural world. I was thinking this week of two inventions, two things that were invented in China, and they were seen as novelties, interesting little things. But when they came to the West, we used them to conquer the world. The compass and gunpowder. Where would the age of discovery, where would the age of colonization have been without the compass and gunpowder? We put them to very different uses than the people of East Asia who had invented them. And then in the fourth week, we'll focus in on the prevailing economic order and how capitalism thrives on our feelings of insecurity, and capitalism needs insecurity in order to exist. So the modern situation, we have loss of belief in the good, the true, and the beautiful. There are no more universals. Loss of trust in the goodness of God's nature, because God has no nature now, only a will. Loss of trust in truths that are not scientifically provable. All of these things become mere opinion. Loss of trust in authority. And loss of a sense that our wills should be trained to accord with our nature, or with the nature of the world. The world is now seen as something that we need to bend to our will, manipulate to our will, rather than conform our will, to train our wills, to educate our wills, to accord with the way the world really is. The nominalist vision of the human person places a great emphasis on the human will. Subsequent developments lead to the human will becoming a self-creating will. I define myself, I create myself, I make my brand. You can trace this through to mid-20th century existentialism, especially in Sartre, and postmodernism, which assume that the essence of our nature is the freedom to redefine our natures at will. You see a lot of this in the recent French thought. I would say the result of not respecting the natural world, of not respecting our nature, is alienation from those. Now, it might seem that this is all just nothing but arcane philosophical speculation. But I would say that it really affects the way we relate to the world. We all carry about an image of God, whether we believe in God or not. We carry around an image of God. It's inevitable. Those images are always false. But what is the image that we're operating out of? What are the assumptions that we're carrying around with us without being aware of them? How do we think about the world? What's our innate sense of how we belong to the world? Our innate sense of what reality is. These things they're very basic. They're very deep down. We take them for granted. And that's what I'm trying to re-examine here a little bit. The example I gave is Justice Kennedy's decision. At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Whatever your thoughts and feelings are on the issue of abortion, this statement, I think, is certainly outstanding for a depiction of the highest values of secular modernity, to define your own concept of the universe and of the mystery of human life. The old Aristotelian idea, the early Christian idea that things have natures, they have final causes, they have reasons for existing, there's an end to which everything is ordered, is gone. It's now subject only to our individual wills. And this is beyond the ability of any of us really to define the meaning of the universe. And this does nothing but add to our own anxiety, uncertainty, and insecurity. We're told by the Enlightenment that we need to make these decisions for ourselves. We can't rely on authority or tradition to give us our place in the universe. And it causes a lot of us a lot of anxiety, which we see. Driving down the street, you see anxiety. Modernity would have us believe that the meaning of our lives is something that we must create for ourselves. It's not been given to us. We're told that our lives have the meaning that we give them, and we can use things any way we want to. And there is no meaning to life except the one that I create for myself. We're in the age of the will. Does my will conform to reality, or do I try to make reality conform to my will? I think we as a culture have been trying to make reality conform to our will. We see it in the destruction of nature. And I think we're going to have to pay the price for that sometime soon. Expressive individualism is more or less the secular religion. I get to define and create the meaning of my life. Nobody gets to tell me. And one of the most powerful ways of self-expression is our sexuality. I talked about the dominance of the idea of the will. If you look at modern concepts of sexual activity, the only thing now that's required for it to be morally licit is consent. Consent is all that's needed to make it legal. The reason we're not supposed to have relations with minors or with people who are impaired is because they're unable to give consent. But the consensus is, as long as there's mutual consent, then that's necessary and sufficient justification for it. Just an example of how the idea of will has become dominant in our society. On the contrary, classically, we thought that things had a nature, that nature dictates to things meaning and purpose. The human person is made to live in a certain way. The correct way for things to be used is embedded in what they are, in their very nature. And this is not a Christian teaching. This is an Aristotelian teaching. Aristotle was teaching this 400 years before Christianity, without the influence of Judaism. So it's something that's very old and very, very deep. The Christians took it over. Circle has a nature of being round. A horse has a nature of horsiness. A hammer has a nature of hammers. You and I have the nature of a human being. These are the natures that nominalism said didn't exist, didn't have any real reality. The traditional understanding was that God cannot change the nature of things. God creates things to have a certain nature and cannot change them. The ultimate source of moral value is not God's will, but rather the nature of how reality is. So the ought is built into the is. The ought is not arbitrary. God could not have issued a contradictory set of commandments. The law that God issues flows out of the real nature of things. Getting into Christology, the example that was given, one of the debates was, could God have saved humanity by being incarnated as a donkey? And traditionally, of course, no, because incarnation as a human being was important. But William of Ockham would have said, well, if God wanted to save us by being incarnated as a donkey, he could have done that. Right and wrong are not decided by God's will. They're embedded in the nature of things. Now, granted, the nature of things comes from God. They're created. We can discern right and wrong by looking at the nature of things. Things are not right or wrong because God says they're right or wrong, but rather God says they're right or wrong because they are right or wrong in themselves. The question came up last week, well, how do we discern this natural law? How do we know what's right and what's wrong? We'll get to the practice of the virtues a little later on tonight, but the important thing I'd say is not to get caught up with what the rules are, what the law is, but to realize that there are such things as final causes. There are such things as natures that are built into the reality of things. And it's up to us to learn what they are, to discern what they are, to conform our wills to the way of reality. What the details are probably less important than the realization of the fact that there is an external reality out there that has a nature. Things have natures. They're made to be used in a certain way. The human person is made to live in a certain way. The correct way for things to be used is embedded in what they are in their nature. And this gets into Christian anthropology. What is the human person? What is the right way to live? What is the right way to live together? This came out recently from Pope Francis. We do not create our nature, we hold it as a gift. So, I'm going to get a little Catholic now. Things have natures, ends, and purposes. This has been forgotten in the world today. We would say the nature of God is love. The nature of the human person is to be like Christ. And the practice of the virtues is how we do this. So this is going to be the next few minutes here. We'll be looking at these 3 bullet points. God is not a thing, but has a nature. Being perfect, God will always act according to that nature. You and I are not perfect. You and I do not act according to our nature. We violate our nature. We do selfish, stupid things. Some of us on a daily basis. When we violate our nature, when we act in ways that do not accord with our nature, that's what the tradition calls sin. So, God is perfect, so God will always act according to that nature. God is simple. The nature of God is love. God exists as love, giving of self to other, and we see this in the Trinity. The Trinity is the central doctrine of Christianity. It's the thing that marks Christianity as being very, very different from the other monotheistic religions and from other spiritual traditions. It's easy to think that love is an action of God, an activity of God, something that God does. But we're still thinking of God as a thing, as a being that acts. Rather, love is what God is. And we see this in the Trinity. The Father loves the Son loves the Father, and that love between them is the Holy Spirit. So God is gazing upon God's self with delight. God is relationship.